A lot of great movies out there that are either inspired by a true story or inspired by true events. You know, a lot of these movies are really great films to watch and I find them really entertaining. But sometimes these films have a tendency to stretch the truth or even blatantly lie about what really happened. So what I would like to talk about is the true story versus the movie adaptation. I want to see just how accurate these movies are compared to their portrayal on the big screen. So the first movie that I want to talk about is 127 Hours.
Good morning, everyone! It is 7 o'clock here in Canyonland, USA.
Okay, so just a brief synopsis on 127 Hours. It's a movie about a guy who went out to a canyon by himself without telling anyone. He didn't even leave a note, nor did he bring any form of communication. No cell phone, no radio, not even a friggin' walkie-talkie while he was on the canyon. He brought his cell phone, but he brought it with him on the trip, but he left it in his car while he was on his adventure. So he goes out to this canyon in Utah and he starts to explore. And during his exploration, he accidentally falls into a crevice inside the canyon, and as he's falling, his arm gets pinned down by a boulder. Over the next 5 days, he does some serious soul searching and life reflection, and during this time, he is also weighing his options. Either cut his arm off with a dull Swiss Army knife, or sit there and die. Become canyon food.
This marks 24 hours of being stuck.
I've been chipping away. Want to keep warm, anything?
I have about 150 milliliters of water left, which should keep me alive till tomorrow night, if I'm lucky.
Okay, so if you've seen this movie, you already know what happens. So what I want to do now is highlight some of the things that really happened and some of the things that did not happen or were exaggerated to make things more exciting. So first, let's talk about the things that did happen. So in the beginning of the movie, it's established that our main character, Aaron, is pretty much a loner and doesn't tell anyone where he's going or even what he's going to do. That part of the movie is true. The real guy who James Franco is portraying, whose real name is Aaron Ralston, was in fact a pretty independent guy who did everything on his own. Later, which we know is going to cost him big time. So later during his exploration, he runs into a few girls who need some direction. So after approaching them, he ends up helping them by giving them some directions. That part of the movie remains true to the original story. He did do that. So after Aaron helps out these other travelers, he continues on his journey to explore the canyon. And that's when it happens. As he's descending down into the slot in the canyon, a boulder becomes loose and it falls right on top of his arm, wedging it in between the rock wall and his right hand. At first he's stunned, then it quickly dawns on him that, holy smokes, I'm freaking stuck here. As anyone would, he tries to remove his arm from the boulder with no success. Then again, as all of us would, he starts to scream for help.
Christy! Megan! Christy! It's Aaron! Megan!
After hours of screaming and attempting to remove his arm, he starts to drink up all his water. Then he realizes that that was all his resources and he needed to ration off his supplies. The movie did a pretty great job portraying this moment as well. I mean, there isn't much you can do to add to a guy getting his arm wedged in between a boulder and a rock wall, so the movie did absolutely nail that part, with most of it being true as compared to the original story. So after he rationed off his inventory, he then decides to use a small knife to chip away at the boulder to see if he can free up enough room to slide his arm out. That didn't work, so on the third day he comes up with a plan to lift the boulder off his arm via a pulley system. But one of the problems with the pulley system was that the rope was too stretchy, so he couldn't really generate enough pull to get any momentum going to free up his arm. And during this whole ordeal, he is also documenting it via his camcorder. And keep in mind, this entire time he has to deal with the extreme temperatures throughout the day. Bone-chilling coldness during the night, and during the day, because of his location in the crevice, he barely got any sunlight, and the sunlight he did get was very brief. Then he started to come down to his final act of human desperation to survive, which was to cut off his arm. So he makes a tourniquet to cut the blood flow and attempts to make some small cuts to test things out. Then he realizes that the knife was too dull to cut through his flesh. And throughout this whole thing, you see him touching his chest, almost like he's getting ready to have a heart attack. So as each hour passes, the closer he is to having a heart attack because of the blood hasn't been circulating properly throughout his body. The movie's portrayal of this also did a fantastic job showing what the real Aaron went through and how he went about attempting to free himself. So the fourth day for Aaron was, no pun intended, rock bottom. After trying everything, the only option he had left was to cut off his arm. Then we see him plunge the small, dull knife into his arm, stabbing at it like it's a piece of meat. He tried severing his arm from the rock. The only problem with that was that he had to cut through the bone, which would be impossible for him to do because of the knife. It was crappy. Also, during all of this cutting, he drank all of his water reserves, forcing him to drink his own urine. At this point, Aaron knew for certain that he would die, so what he did was he recorded a final farewell message on his camera to his family. Then he etched out his name, birth date, the day he was going to die, and right beside that, R.I.P. The next morning was the most important day of his life, and probably what would be caused by dehydration or lack of sleep. He had a vision of himself and his future son. This vision lit a fire inside of Aaron that would help him free himself. Even though he still couldn't cut through the bone, he decided to twist and turn, snapping each bone and tearing off all the ligaments that connected his arm to the rest of his body. In one of the most disturbing scenes in the film, he finally cuts his arm off and frees himself from the boulder. And as he steps back away from the boulder, watching his arm still there, he knew that the adrenaline would wear off soon. So then he wraps his arm in a plastic bag and covered it with his book bag. And the last thing he did before he left was he took a picture to remember where he had been and what he had gone through. This gruesome scene in the real Aaron's life was beautifully captured through this movie. It's a very accurate portrayal of what really happened, so the movie did get that right. After getting out of the canyon, he begins his long journey back to his car, and on his way he runs into a couple along with their son. In an effort to survive, he calls out to them pleading for help. They give him some water and they begin walking with Aaron. He asks the mother and son to go ahead and get some help ahead of them, and the father stayed behind and walked with Aaron. And along the way, the father asks Aaron if he wants to stop and take a break, but he refuses, knowing that if he stopped now, that he could possibly die. So as they're walking along, marching forward, Aaron finally decides to sit down and take a break, and that's when the rescue chopper arrives. So after getting on the chopper and being rescued, he makes a full recovery from his experience, and then he would go on to meet his wife 3 years later, and then he fulfills his vision he had in the canyon by having that son. Okay, now I want to go back and talk about the things that the movie didn't really get right, or just highlight some of the tweaks that the movie made to the original story. So in the beginning, when Aaron met those two girls, the movie shows them going on a bit of a mini adventure. That never happened. Yes, he did meet a pair of travelers, but the only thing he did was point them in the right direction. They never went on a mini adventure, and he was never invited to a party. I think the only reason they added this was because, well, cute girls. Okay, another scene that was spiced up to keep the viewers entertained was the part where he went back and viewed the footage from his mini adventure with those cute girls. But again, that never happened, so how could he view something that never happened? This was put into the movie to help fill that void of action, because keep in mind, this movie is about a guy who can't move. He's stuck in one place for most of the movie, and you have to keep the people entertained. Another hallucination that he had was the part where he was on a game show. To keep himself upbeat and entertained, he pretended like he's on a game show by playing the host, the caller, and even the guests. This scene in the movie was completely made up. Even the real Aaron admits that never happened.
Canyonland, USA. And this morning,
another part of the movie that was fabricated was the part in which he reflected on his past relationship with his ex-girlfriend. In the movie, it shows him sort of being regretful that he left his former girlfriend and sort of sets her up as the one that got away. And the movie even goes as far as imagining him getting back with his ex. Although this does add an element of entertainment, the real Aaron says that never happened. He even says that he didn't even really think about his girlfriend while he was trapped in the canyon.
Please! Please!
So the next scene I'd like to highlight is the scene where he is found by the rescue chopper. So in the movie, it looks like as if the chopper found him based on pure luck, but in reality, his coworkers and family reported him missing days ago. His coworkers started to get worried, and because he stopped showing up for work. So what they did is they tried to find clues based on some of the emails he had sent. After they figured out how to get into his email, they tried to find some hints as to where he was. They couldn't find anything, and the only tip-off that they could was that he made purchases on his credit card to buy some food in Utah. So that's where the authorities started their search. Now the rescue chopper actually seen the mother and the son, and they helped to point to where Aaron was, and he was actually just inside a mile of his own truck. So the exaggerated bit comes from the chopper coming in to save the day. It didn't happen like that. The chopper knew where he was based on where the mother and son told him, and they've been looking for him for days, so they weren't completely unaware that he was missing. So having highlighted some of those things, overall I think this movie was a fantastic and accurate adaptation as to what really happened. Even Aaron himself says that the filmmakers underplayed it a bit. And a few quotes from the real Aaron himself includes, "That to me is the reaction that tells me that the filmmakers just nailed it." And that quote is in regards to the people fainting in the theater. Another quote is, "As far as watching the movie itself, it's extremely emotional. And to be able to share this with my loved ones, it's a gift." Another quote is, "It draws me in to remember the intensity of my experience. It was like watching a ghost of my past or being transported back into time." So, in conclusion, I think this movie gets the seal of being accurate, and it does a fantastic job of showing what really happened. So, thanks for watching, and if you like this, please let me know, and if I've kept you entertained enough, don't be afraid to subscribe. If you have any movie recommendations that you would like me to talk about, please leave a comment below. Having said all that, okay, see you, bye.